Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now today I'm honoured to be speaking with Keith and David Mayer. Keith and David, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for having us.
Well, I'm really excited for the next hour or so. I've got both of you on the line, father and son. That's a first for the Sports Psych Show. So we're going to try and coordinate this as effectively as possible. And one of the many reasons why I'm super excited to have you both on the show is because what a soccer family you are, a footballing family you are, with years of experience coaching the beautiful game. Globally as well. Keith, you're at home here in the Liverpool area. David, you're over in the States in Salt Lake City. So this is a truly transatlantic Sports Psych Show episode. And we're going to be principally talking about your book today, Gold Dust, How to Become a More Effective Coach Quickly. So super excited about that. I think to get us started, what would be great is for you both to introduce yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience. Seniority goes first. So Keith, why don't you introduce yourself first?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. It's a real honour to be on your show. I started. I was a player, like many. I didn't make much from it as a player because I got injured very early in my career. And then you got the question of what next. My dad, from a young age, I always worked with my dad, who was a builder. So when I played as a pro, as a young pro, you're sort of doing 10, 12 hours a week. Where the lads would be going playing golf or playing snooker or whatever else they did, I was on the building sites working with my dad. But then I sort of I got into coaching very, very young, and it trapped me and it intrigued me immensely. So it took me on a journey, and the journey still continues 37 years further on, and it's taken me, to many countries around the world, and I feel extremely fortunate enough to coach on 6 continents. I've coached at two centre of excellence at Leeds United many years ago, part-time, and then went down to Nottingham Forest with Paul Hart, and who became the manager.
Yep.
Eventually. And then Nick Marshall, who was the academy manager. I got offered full-time roles down there, but it wasn't the right thing to do. After which I got into coach education, so I'm an affiliate tutor for our FA, and I've done that for many, many years. Seen many changes with that in terms of the methodology and the process, which is healthy. And I currently coach at part-time again at Liverpool Football Academy. And so that's pretty much me. And I'm still learning, Dan. The more and more I think I know, the more and more I find out that I don't.
Absolutely. We're all on that journey, and we're all discovering that fact. Brilliant. And I suppose over to you, David. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're up to.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So very, very similar story to my dad. I played. I had to retire I retired young. When I say young, I was 25. I'd had multiple surgeries. It was actually just short of 3 years ago. I've never played since. Never been able to play since. So again, like my dad, what do you do? I was actually coaching at this time anyway. While I was playing, I grew up around my dad. Whenever he was traveling, I was going with him. By choice as well. I wanted to go with him, and we spent a lot of time together. Going down, I remember fondly going down to Nottingham Forest. But that journey that I went on as a kid, with the good experiences that I had, it led me to to have an interest in coaching. So even though I was playing, I was still coaching. Obviously, it was part-time. It was a hobby more than anything else. And right before I actually retired, I was from playing. Before I had to stop playing, I was just on my B license. I was just finishing my B license off, so I was already on the journey. And after having to stop playing, I went into coaching, and I've been, I'd say, full-time pretty much now, coaching for about 3 years or so. But I think in total I've probably been around 10 years coaching myself, actually delivering. So learning loads, which is great. I think that's incredibly important, and it's also really rewarding when you're learning a lot. So yeah, I've recently moved to the US. I got offered a role here in the US in Salt Lake City, Utah. So I'm out here coaching now, but again, like my dad, I've been very fortunate already. I've coached on 4 continents, which I think not only for the travel, but the different cultures and the people that you meet and the things that you learn from those people. So really fortunate with that. But and then obviously within the past, what are we, 12, just short of 12 months, the idea of the book came up, and that in itself was a big journey. So that was a good learning experience for both of us, and will continue to be a fun journey too.
Well, that book, David, is called Gold Dust: How to Become a More Effective Coach Quickly, and I'm really, really excited to talk to you both about it today. You've written it together. In fact, I think, David, you've written the most of it. Would I be right in saying that? Yeah.
I spent countless hours in what we call the Starbucks office. So it would daily trips, and it was my getaway. I had my table that was pretty much reserved, but obviously it wasn't just me. My dad, there was a lot of knowledge and experience that came from him, and ideas, and I would present stuff to him, and it would be a yes or a no, or it needs a tweak here or there. But I mean, we both, I'd say we both contributed equally to it, just in different areas.
It sounds like classic autonomy supportive authoring, whereby your dad gave you the autonomy, but actually at the same time was gently controlling as well. It's just like, yep, that can go in. No, that's not going. Which is fair enough. And as I'm just stealing a fantastic line in your book, Keith, you probably sprinkled some gold dust and some verbal vitamins within the book, which I think is fantastic. And coming to you, Keith, I know you wanted to talk about the dedication in the book because it's incredibly meaningful to you and incredibly meaningful to English soccer. You've dedicated it to the late coach Dick Bate, who I only met once. But why don't you tell us for a couple of minutes just a little bit about Dick, why you dedicated it to him, and where some of the proceeds of the book go to?
I met Dick 35 years ago, Dan, on a course in Blackpool, the Blackpool Easter course, and he had such a profound influence on my life, and I'm sure many listeners can probably go on a similar journey. But he was very unique. He was a pathfinder that, you know, when you come across somebody and you know they know, he was one of them. And even though, you know, over that period of time, I never heard him speak badly about man or woman. I just think that's an immense trait to be able to, you know, do that. And so Dick was director of many courses across the world, in actual fact, where he directed our air license. He was on my what was called a full badge back in 1984, which I failed, and then I passed in 1985, which is now the current air license. And everywhere you go at the sharp end, Dick was, Dick Bate was there. He was around the England setups, around the youth system, and around the actual formative years of coach education. And so I was fortunate again to work with him over in South Korea, where I presented on the pro license, and we built up a wonderful relationship. It went beyond football, even though he was, when he walked into a room, he had an immense presence, but equally such a private man. I think people like that, they work in isolation very easily, but when they're on stage, it comes alive. And everywhere that I used to go, people used to speak of him fondly. So I was the last person to actually see him work. I was with him in South Korea in 2017, and after coming back from there, shortly afterwards, it was, he finally got a brain tumour, and so in 2018 he passed. So again, we're in Starbucks. Hotel Starbucks locally, and it was decided I would dedicate the book to Dick, and I share with you, and I had a moment. I had to go outside and just collect my emotion, really, and collect my thoughts. Rang his wife Maggie and asked whether she would give consent to that, and she was very pleased about it. So 10% of the proceeds, 10% of the profits from the book, Dan, go to the Giles Trust, which is the brain tumour fund which looked after my dear friend in his latter years of life, or latter days of life. And so, yeah, it means such a lot. I know he touched a lot of people's lives, and I know his legacy will continue with such fondness in my memory, and I'm sure many other people that he came across.
Well, I unfortunately didn't get to meet Dick enough times, and but I did share with you a couple of weeks ago when we spoke on the phone. The one special memory I did have, which is when I presented quite a few years ago when my book Soccer Tough came out. I presented down in Bristol to an audience of coaches, and I took some books down there, and I noticed Dick having a little look at it, and a little bit of money exchanging hands between him and the person who was behind the counter there, and I was like, wow, Dick Bate is buying my book, that's incredible. So for everybody, this is a global show, and there will be some people, I don't know who they are, but there will be some people who won't have heard of Dick. He really was one of the finest coaches in British sport. And I'm just going to borrow to as a neat segue into talking about your book, I'm going to borrow from your dedication here, Keith. You said, whenever Dick and I spoke, he always inspired me with his ability to make me feel special. He was a mentor and a friend. Dick has played a huge part in my life, and for that I will be forever grateful. I miss our conversations, my friend. And I think it's really interesting because I think you speak about Dick there, and you're talking about feelings and feeling special, and him making you feel special and making you feel a big part of his life. And that's what your book is about. It's a coaching book. My interpretation here is it's a coaching book that isn't about the X's and the O's. It's about feeling. And you open the book in the introduction by saying, and I just think this is the most powerful opening that there can be, really, in many respects. You open it by saying, when people feel better, they generally perform better. When people feel better, they generally perform better. And a few weeks ago, I actually had Steve Magnus, the great sports scientist and athletics coach, on the show. And we talked about, in essence, the science that underpins that, the hormones that are released. But that's the science, and I want to really get into the people business today. I agree with that completely. When people feel better, they generally perform better. And that's what this book is about. And I know you came to writing this book, Keith, working with David, your son. after having quite a long journey in coaching, as you've already described. And it sounds to me like it wasn't always that way. It sounded to me maybe like you were more of what we might call a transactional coach rather than a transformational coach. And you yourself had a transformation, and you opened the book in chapter 1. It's called The Lone Wolf. And it's an experience that sounds like it completely changed your coaching world. Can you tell us about that? Tell us about The Lone Wolf and what it did to you and your coaching.
I think when we come across, it was like an epiphany. I came across a young player, Dan, that never spoke, and it was a case study that I took upon myself to pursue, where we come across players that are athletes, when they're different. And that difference can stand out, and depending on what that difference might be, if it's different towards our beliefs and how we might have a bias towards a specific behaviour, then it stands out. And this player was different. He was extremely quiet, and getting to know the player a little bit more, there were reasons, I think, behind it. I just had a conversation with one of his parents over Christmas, one of the breaks that we had at the club, and just to find out how he was doing, really. So he'd been at the club, a few months, and I never knew the player. We get to know them as a footballer, and I think, which is fine, but when you start to dig and trawl a little bit deeper, Dan, there's little gold nuggets that start to appear. And so I'd asked his one of his parents. I said, how's Christmas? Great, general chit chat, really. And then I inquired about John, and she said he's great. Do you want to have a chat with him? I said, yeah, but before I do so, would you? How many other children do you have in the family? And she said 5. I said, yeah, okay, well, interesting. That would be an interesting Christmas for you, Christmas presents, etc. I said, where is he in the pecking order in terms of age? She said, well, he's the youngest, and he's a twin. And she said he's extremely quiet. I said, well, yeah, he is actually. Could there be any reasons? Might there be any reasons behind that? She said, yeah, his twin sister did all the talking for him in school. That was a light bulb moment for me. It really was very, so I'm just logging this. And so the story short, I got to speak to John, and over over the telephone. And so I asked the question, how are you? He said, I'm fine. And Dan, he never spoke, the kid, never spoke at all. And when I asked him about how he was, and then he replied with, how are you? That was it really was a wow moment for me, because I actually accessed a free communication realm where he was openly communicating, maybe because I wasn't there and couldn't see me, or it was very different. Anyway, I came off the call, and it was the ball, bib, cone, and grass. Look, it's important, is not? But that call actually opened up so much, and it actually got me to consider how I go about doing my business. We called it the Lone Wolf. Sometimes we aim to fix, where in actual fact, they're quite comfortable in who they are. We don't have to fix. So really, his silence between the notes, because his actions spoke louder than his words, and continue to do so. So, I got the sense from him he had more freedom to speak openly in front of, over one of the remote access telephone and using the had his mum on the line as well, so we're not breaking any child protection issues. So it got me to think about me and the loneliness that coaching can be at times, but the feeling that was generated from that conversation got me to access and to think seriously about this privacy that we need, each one of us require, and it's paying attention to that. And so we just let him play. We don't have to. Do we need to be vocal? But it certainly helped. It helped my practice and how I go about. I deliver my sessions, and particularly working in. We work in a team sport. The book's about sport. It's a sports book, but it's actually about working with individuals and enhancing their performances by breaking down specific barriers. And it was a wonderful experience for me. I think it's the more you think the more you find out you don't, and that was one of those eureka moments for me. And it's always been there. So, do they need to? Did the players need to communicate phonetically? And no, as long as they show in their action, I think we're good. And it's proving that is the case. And the coaches that have followed on from me are doing such a terrific job. But that one conversation I had with his parents was opened the door. So it was a wonderful time in my life, having coached a long time at that point. But then gave me a shot across the bow. Come on, there's a lot more out there that I require. But the feelings that have been emitted from it have really got me grounded to where we are at the moment.
It's interesting listening to you, Keith, because I was trying to search as you were speaking there for where the epiphany lay, and I dare say it lay in multiple places. But one thing that really struck me from your discourse there was the notion that as coaches we should appreciate and accept the individual in front of us, the personality in front of us. And I think, and it would be interesting to get your both of your opinions on this. I think maybe in coaching we're a little quick to declare what kind of behaviours, what kind of ideal personality footballers, our people, should have. What I hear you say, that epiphany sounds like, for you it was, well, okay, this person in front of me, this person is who he is, this person is who she is, and that's okay. I can work with that. I can build a connection there, rather than, hey, they have to be this way. They've got to be like this. What's your thoughts on that, David?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you're dealing with individuals, and I don't think you'll ever find two people that are exactly the same, both in the way that they behave, in the way that they are brought up, with the things that they've experienced. And it's interesting, that story, the lone wolf story. I've experienced and come across boys and girls since then that have been similar. Where really that story for me, I was going, maybe if I wasn't aware of it, I would have, I guess, tried to stamp my authority because I thought I knew what was right. When in reality, I think sometimes you've got to delve deeper and peel back the layers of what it is you're looking for. Because at the end of the day, you're dealing with individuals, you're dealing with different people, and yes, we could say we're dealing with athletes, but we're not. We're dealing with people before we're dealing with anything else. And I think that's the key in all of it, is remembering that behind the athlete is a person, and that person has a story, they have experiences that we may not be aware of. And there's things that they've gone through in their life that we may never have even imagined. And it could be something so simple as there may be a change in behaviour from a child, and it could be that the parents are breaking up. And people can be really quick to jump on and say, well, the behaviour's not good enough and we can punish it. But in reality, we don't know why we're punishing and what we're actually doing it for. There's more to it. I think we've got to do more as coaches to find out more about our players, and whether it's a phone call after a game, or whether it's, I know in this period right now, and I think a lot of coaches are in a even though it's a difficult situation in regards to not being able to physically be at trainings, to physically be able to connect with people. I think it's also a really good opportunity to find out more about people. And I'm using this time. I've been speaking to my players within the club. I've also been finding out more from the coaches. What are they doing with the spare time? Because they've got spare time. What do they enjoy? And I'll go back and I'll revisit it. I know I had a conversation with a boy the other day, and it's funny. He's similar to John in the respect that he doesn't speak very much. I mean, we have team Zoom calls. He says very little, if anything, and that's okay. I don't have to force him to talk on the Zoom calls because I don't want to make him uncomfortable. It's not my place to make him speak if he doesn't want to. But over the phone, he speaks, he converses, and I found out he likes history. And every time I speak to him, I find out what he's been doing in history, and what he enjoys about history, and I revisit it. And I think it's unbelievably important, because it shows that I actually care about what it is he's saying, rather than just asking a question just for the sake of asking it, because I think we can do that. You know, how are you? And we ignore the response. The key is listening to the response, not. We've really got to tune into what people say to us.
Fascinating, and as you're speaking there, I mean, a few things that came to mind was the complication, the challenge of coaching, dealing with the individual, as you reinforce their different needs, wants, hopes, doubts, beliefs, and lastly, they're talking about the connection, building a connection with the player, and that's where you go with chapter 2, building a connection, and then chapter 3, building on the connection. And there's some great little subtitles here, and you talking about building a connection leads me on to a nice little story from that you experienced, Keith, when you met up with Darren Moore, the former Premier League soccer player, now manager, previously with West Brom and now with Doncaster. And, you know, in this chapter you talk about having a genuine warmth, using an athlete's name, building rapport. And that's what you had when you met with Darren Moore, didn't you, Keith? He genuinely built some rapport with you.
Yeah, we met Darren in 2000, it was November 2017. I never met the gentleman. I'd heard about him, of course. When you actually meet him in person, you were talking about an immense character, and, you know, such a humble man. He's a wonderful man. So I was actually over at West Brom Academy, and we got funnily enough, it was the third module of the pro license for the South Koreans, and they'd come on over, and there's a guy working alongside me, a guy called Gary Phillips, who's a sports science, worked for the FA full time. Gary, he's a great man, Gary. And when I first met Darren, you know, I was just watching the practice that was taking place in front of my eyes with the rest of the South Koreans. And funnily enough, there was an A license taking place, or a license in situ visit. And my attention was drawn to what was happening on the field, and then this huge gentleman came over to me and introduced himself. Hi, Keith. My name's Darren, and of course I knew who he was, and you know, you could shake hands back then, obviously.
Yeah.
When I first met with Darren, it was though I'd known him for a long, long time, and it was the use of the name, and how he used the name, and the warmth and the affinity and connection that we had in such a short period of time. He made me it just made you feel, and makes you feel like $1 million. It's like you're the only one on the planet because you're the most important person there. And when we were conversing, he was fully in the moment. He was fully present. He was giving you everything that he had to make you feel unique. I just thought that was such an humbling sensation. I came home, I travelled home that night. I mentioned to my wife about this unique person I had met, but it was how he did it. It was what he was doing to make that connection. And it's the use of the name, and he spent so much time. Funnily enough, the first team was West Brom's first team were playing against Newcastle that night, and so Darren had been with the first team in the morning. They'd done whatever they were doing, and they were having a meal prior to. But he left us about 1:45 in the afternoon, and there was a Q&A with the South Koreans, and he could not do enough. It was a genuine generosity of a person that was congruent. Everything was aligned in his message and with his body. So when I say really come across that uniqueness, Dan, that's how really, really different. Because football, it can be a little different at times, and he was very comfortable in his own skin. And I know David, of course, when he first met with Darren, we met Darren on the 4th of July when we actually interviewed Darren for the book. And I'm sure David, you may be able to show you a similar experience.
Yeah, I think, again, my dad knew Darren at this point. I'd never met him. And I had the same experience. And we went for breakfast. We went to a breakfast to meet him, to do an interview. And he gets out this car and he comes bounding over with it was the biggest smile you would ever see. And I'd never met him, like I said. And he came over and just straight to me. And again, David, how are you? It's great to see you. And I'm thinking, I've never met this fella. And he was genuinely treating me like I'd known him for years. And we touch on the feelings. It made me feel good. And I think it was, that for me was a moment, because there was the use of the name, but also the smile. And I know Mother Teresa has a quote, we shall never know the good that a simple smile can do. And the smile that he brought, it made me smile. And I think about, the way at the time we met, it still does. But we touch on the use of names. That was really an eye-opener, I think, for both of us. But it definitely was for me, because the second interview we actually did for the book with a guy called Justin Holbrook, who he's actually in the 2.5 year span he spent in rugby league, in the Super League, he's the most successful coach that's ever been in the sport. I mean, we talk about win percentage was higher than anyone of all time. But the guy was just an incredible guy. We were very, very fortunate to spend a lot of time with him. We spent time in the meetings with the team before and after games. We went to trainings. I'm extremely thankful that we were able to do that and actually able to meet him. And he's someone that's become a friend, especially for my dad. But I know when we asked Justin, what was the first thing you did? Because you were in Australia, and within a day you have accepted this job and you've moved over to somewhere you've never been, to a club that you've never seen the facilities, you've never met the players. What did you do? And it was quite interesting. He said from him deciding that he was taking the job, he had about 36 hours before he met the players. And within that time, he did everything he could to learn every player's name and to find out something about them. And he said, when I walked into that building that very first day, I made point that I spoke to every player individually address them by the name, and ask them something personal about their lives. And for 2.5 years he did that. I mean, we saw him. I mean, the shield was down when we were with him, and he was like that with the players for 2.5 years. And I think it comes as no surprise that even at the top level, that somebody like that, the success that he had was down to obviously a lot of X's and O's and knowledge and help from other staff that he had, but it came down to the connection that he built and the closeness of the group because of the way he dealt with the people within the group.
What it did, Dan, it created a trust. It creates an element of trust straight away. You know, they've nothing. The guards down. They just make you feel comfortable in where you're at, and you know that. I think that their openness to use your name, to use, you were christened, and to use it appropriately. It might just be it might only be a little thing, but it's a huge thing. It goes under the radar. We're not just saying the name, the use of your name. Do you use your name at the beginning of a sentence, like, "Hey Dan, well done," or "Well done, Dan"? He's playing around with that, but it's just the, the people who are very comfortable in who they are tend to be free and open, and that sense that they project, the feeling they project, it transmits. And in the forming of the book, there were a series of questions that we came up with, because all I basically did, I was sort of, I think I was a number 6. I played a number 6 role. I was getting it and pinging it, and then I'd be getting it and playing it into my midfield player, and then I'd zip one into the top half of the pitch. And my David's receiving skills were outstanding, and he just formed and built all of this story. But that was. I have this saying that teams don't exist. I throw it out there. Teams don't exist. Now, it's nonsense to say they don't exist in its entirety, because they do. But I just feel every team has a uniqueness, and the uniqueness is within their individual, and they're all bespoke. And if we come in with some layers and boundaries and rules from the get-go, we know we have to have a framework, because we can't have the inmates can't run the asylum. They cannot. We know that. There's got to be some rules and boundaries, but we've got to deal with people differently, and we've got to be tuned into that. And Darren and many more, and David just alluded to Justin Albrook, and there are others in there as well. But we asked questions, and the question really was, when you first meet with your athlete, what's the first thing you do? And that was a standard question. And there's Gareth Holmes, who's full time at Nottingham Forest. He's a terrific young man. He said it's in the handshake. I looked them in the eye. It's in the handshake. And if you're going to get to knowing Gareth and knowing him as I do, but yet with Justin, it was the use of the name. What you do, I'll ask more about them, and that's really that's what the book's about. It's about connecting. It isn't an X's and O's book. It's about personal relationships that we're going on a journey with these. We don't have to fix. We're here to work together and dovetail to meet your need.
When I listen to you both talk about Darren Moore, Justin Holbrook, I'm thinking about interpersonal skills, with an emphasis on the word skills. That everybody probably has a different capability, or starts at a certain point, a different capability with their interpersonal skills. But in the clues in the name, skill, these skills can be developed. And you're giving us examples there from Darren Moore, the warmth, the smile, the handshake, the enthusiasm. And then you're giving us another type of example from Justin Holbrook. He walks into a club within 36 hours. He's forming relationships. He's connecting. and then building on that connection. And another word you use there, Keith, framework. I think it's really important because in chapter 3, building on the connection, you say to get the long-term buy-in that you want from your athlete, you have to delve deeper and maintain the level of care you show to them. Most athletes want to know 3 things. Do you care for me? Can you help me? Can I trust you? And for me, those 3 questions offer a framework for a coach to develop those crucial interpersonal skills that I've got to demonstrate that I care for them, that I can help them, that they can trust me. And it's really interesting with the Justin Holbrook story, because I do think we still live in a world where coaches, probably their first thought when they walk into a club can tend to be, what's my principles of play? How am I going to exploit these and use these? What's my game model going to be with these players? Rather than, say, that kind of framework related to connection and trust. Would be good to get your thoughts on that.
For sure. That framework that you refer to, and that's in the book, the likes of the successful managers will have displayed those to varying degrees. I think that trust element takes a period of time, because you can come on in, you might come along, and you've got history, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to transmit that skill that you've had elsewhere and then bring it to a different environment with different players in a different context that might be wearing a different kit that have different skill sets. So we've got to be flexible in our behaviours to be able to work alongside with players. It's our journey. It's not that one individual's journey. Because if we get into the ego, and so when it's mentioned in that chapter, Dan, we truly believe in these. If you like, it's a principle. It's a great framework where players they'll pick up from they'll hear your words. Players will hear your words, but they sense your attitude. And if you're going to be consistent with your messages, and you're going to be consistent in your behaviours, then that's a great start for the players. At least they'll know where you are. It's when there's an inconsistency of the message and your behaviours. So we're setting up conversations. Really, it's a journey. It's a dance, is it not? When we communicate. But if you're inconsistent with your message, and that framework starts to break down, and the scaffold then it falls flat. So they want to know that you care, and basically they want to know that they can learn from you, and after that, anything's possible. We just got to give them the opportunity, they being the players or the athlete, to give us. To give them the freedom of expression and of creativity, because opportunity is boundless beyond that. And so, it's important. And I live those principles. It's something that we hold dear, and it was massive for us to share that in that chapter. But equally, it was very interesting that the people that we interviewed had similar beliefs, and I just think there's a syntax, there's something happening there. So it could not go in the book. It's not just my belief or our belief. It was these are people that have Steve Highway's in the book, the Liverpool legend, and they're similar. They might transmit the message slightly differently than Dan, but having listened to them, and we transcribed and we recorded every interview. There was a commonality across it. So it's Yeah, I think you frame it up lovely, that Dan. You know, we need to be consistent with it.
They're ageless principles, aren't they, Keith? And one of the things I love about the book is that whilst it is about feeling, it's still very rich with techniques. And you move on from connection, because we can connect with players and we can keep our messages consistent, and that's absolutely vital. And that gets us to the players' table, if you like. But then we want to dine with the player, to use the analogy. And you move on to talk about motivation, David. You know, how do you motivate players? What's the general principles, thoughts and philosophies within this chapter 4 of gaining and maintaining motivation?
Yeah, I think understanding what their motivation is first, because, you know, I can come in and I want us to do X, Y and Z, not really knowing what the player's motivation is, and I think, look, at the top level, it could be that the player has got to where he's got to, where the athlete's got to, where they've got to, the family, and they've wanted to get out of hardship, and that is their motivation. The motivation isn't pots and pans, it isn't money, it's something else, and being able to understand what those motivations are just enables you to press the right button. But again, I think if you turn it to, if you have an athlete that for example, they don't want to lose the place on the team, if you give them the tools that they require and tell them what's required for them to not lose the place, it opens up more rather than doing it on the other foot. And I think at the same time, look, the individuals and players, it's important that we know that they have expectations of themselves too. And at the same time, as teachers, our expectations of them, because I think we are teachers when we're coaching, we're doing it to teach. We want to learn. We want to help people learn. But our expectations and our beliefs around a player can have profound impact on the way that they see themselves too, because the way that we think about something generally dictates the way we behave as well. And I think we have to be really mindful about that. I think, and there was a study. There was a study done around this by Dr. Carol Dweck that was based around the words that you use and how you address. Also, there was a study done a long time ago, and it probably wasn't ethically it wasn't a very good study, but it painted a good picture of how the brain works and how people see themselves. And it was a study where they labelled kids and put them in certain categories, so to speak, and told the teachers what categories these students fit in. So whether it was the top of the class, these kids are the smart kids, they're the strivers. We've got the middle of the pack, and these kids at the bottom, they're not very smart. And over the course of this study, it turned out that the kids actually performed to the expectations that were set upon them, more because of the way that the teachers acted towards them. And I think to get to really dig deep with the athletes from a motivational standpoint, you can't pin them into one thought or another on your belief. We've got to be mindful of that.
Absolutely, and that study that you're talking about is the Robert Rosenthal study from 1965, also known as the Pygmalion effect, taken from the famous film. And it's actually a study I've used in the past as an example. I think it's fascinating. I mean, it's certainly had its critics in terms of some procedures within the study, but it makes sense to me that how we are as teachers, as coaches, is going to influence our players, basically, how we perceive our players. If we perceive our players to be, let's say, no good from a very basic standpoint, we're gonna engage in a lot of kind of very micro movements that demonstrates that we don't actually believe in them. We might ignore them, we might turn our back on them, we might speak quite negatively to them. Whereas if we act, if we go about our coaching in a manner whereby we portray ourselves as believing in them, that we're motivated around them, that our behaviours are engaged in motivational behaviours, then we motivate them. We help them feel good. We help them feel confident. And I think it's you use that study as an example of helping to develop motivation. I think that's fantastic, because I think that's those kind of little studies are often left out of these kind of books.
I think as well, Dan. So, because like you touched on, that's the coach's beliefs. At the same time, I do find, and I think everybody will find as well, that athletes have beliefs around themselves, whether they be true or not. And we touched on it in the book as well. Around, you can get a feel for someone's beliefs with the language that they use, and when you pay attention to it, it becomes more evident. And it could be something as simple as, and I love this one. When you get a player that you get them to use, and people use the term weak foot. I don't think there is a weak foot or a weak hand. It's the other foot, the other hand. It's left and right, because we paint this picture of it's weak. Well, it then becomes weak to that person. And I love the one where you within football, within soccer, you have athletes, when you say, right, I want you to use your left foot, and their reply is, well, I can't. Well, for me, I am not accepting that, because you can. You only in that scenario, you can't if you don't have a left leg. You've got a left leg and you can use it. It's not to say that it's going to be different class the first time you use it, because I think you look at Picasso, he didn't pick up a paintbrush and all of a sudden become this world-class painter. And I think to be able to break those beliefs that kids have, not even kids, I think that there's athletes at the top of the game that'll have those beliefs where you can't do something or they're limited by it. And it's taking small steps with it. And when I have a player that says, well, I can't use my weak foot. Can't use my weak foot. Well, no, you can't use your left foot. Brilliant. And it's just I'll throw it. Go on here then. There's a ball for you. Go and hit that with your left. And then missing the ball with the left might seem quite insignificant, but they've just told me they can't do it. When in reality they did it, and they might not have scored. It doesn't matter. They've actually just done something that they said they can't do, and I think really put an emphasis on that as well. I mean, I had an experience like that a couple of months back now with a kid, and he couldn't use his left foot apparently, and I've rolled one out and he smashed it into the bottom corner. And I bigged it up like no end. It was, I was dancing with. You've just told me you can't use your left foot, and you've just put that into what a fantastic. I love it, and I think when you see somebody that has beliefs, so for that kid now, whenever he uses his left foot, I make note of it. I saw you using your left foot, fantastic, brilliant. Love how you worked hard to use your left foot. That was brave, and being able to recognise it with the fine language, with the words that people use, and understanding what they believe the limitations are too.
Well, and I think this is fascinating, because obviously language matters, words matter, and in Chapter 6 you talk about the highly effective communicator, and you've given us some ideas there. And you've touched upon Carol Dweck on her work over the last 30, 40 years on narrative and meaning systems, the power of words. And I'd love to take the opportunity to ask Keith here. You know, Keith, you've been coaching for 37 years. I mean, wow, you've seen some good players, some great players come and go. But when you coach, are you, when you step foot on that pitch, when you step foot on the grass, how deliberate are you with your language? Are you on autopilot? Are you monitoring the language you're using? Are you deliberately engaging in language that empowers players? Does that come naturally? Where are you with that?
Yeah, I think again, it's once you've gone through and you've got access, you're accessing the portals of the players' neurology. You've got something, you've got in there. You can now take them on a journey. You can see with this, Dan. I think the biggest indicator of success in your message is really in the change of their behaviour, and as a consequence, the performance enhancement. Now that's pretty evident when you see somebody smash the ball in the back of the net. There's an element of success, but I do, Dan. There's times where I think you do go into autopilot because there's too much going on in front, but there'll be things like questions which can either open them up. Dan, listen up. Hey, look, now this is an individual question. I've got some information that might help you become a better athlete. Would you be interested in finding out what that information might be? Well, of course, anyone who wants to know and learn will be, So you've then opened up this port access to part of the brain, which then gives them that license to go and go, Now that doesn't mean you finish there. You then need to follow it up. So how you use your voice and how close they feel to that, because again, they'll sense your attitude. So that opening question, then you need to go in with some specific detail that will help them. Okay, that's great. Now then, if you were to consider doing this, or this, that may help you to become an even better player. Now, once we've got that going, it's then organic in nature, and then you're following things up. When you then see that behaviour or an action which is positive or it's productive, we have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge it by, Dan, I saw what you did, and it might be a thumbs up. It's an acknowledgement of a positive behaviour that then increases that muscle from within them to give it a go again and again and again and again. Then we've got to stretch them. We've got to stretch them, but ensure that we're securing them and they're in this safe environment whereby wherever they do, they can play with inhibition. They just play. If they play with freedom, anything's possible for them. But we've got to acknowledge, we're not just praising effort, because at the sharp end where you've got to look for performance, effort at, if you're running and you're running 40 yards, and if we're praising effort all the time, it becomes a gimme. But when we're actually stretching them through either a technical, the technical aim or the technical outcome, and that outcome's been achieved, then we've got to acknowledge that. So embedding commands and embedding questions can actually, and it's done covert, it's done overt, they don't need to know, they don't have to know. But as coaches, I think we need to know that, and we have to have an element of understanding behind what is actually taking place, because once we've asked questions, then we then need to acknowledge, or at least be very mindful of the response of that question from the athlete, because I think we ask questions a great deal, but actually intently don't listen to the response or don't watch for that response. It's a behavioural thing. You can't hide it. We leach information from every cell of the body, and it's the minutiae that we need to be looking for. It could be a little wince, or the information's outside, and I think over a period of time, I'm still learning, but I've picked up now over many years. There are little things that do take place, which I think I might have hit a nerve there. A player might not respond appropriately, so you might need to give them some oxygen. Get out the way, get out the face, leave them, and then pick it up again. And rather than following on from that past behaviour where they have, if you like, there might be a stimulus response, a negative one, we've got to break the pattern of behaviour and change the subject. Crack on, move on. It's not important to dwell on that moment, because all we're going to do is embed a negative action or a negative belief. So, once we've picked that up, we're then going to move on, and it's another cycle. It's a never-ending cycle. In the last chapter, we refer to the Boilermaker story, and it's you mentioned it. There's a skill and an art behind every action and every behaviour. If we are, I think the artist actually knows where to tap and when to tap. But it's micro detail and knowing how to tap. I think we've got lots of coaches that know how to coach nowadays, Dan, but not sure they know what to coach specifically for the individual.
I think it's really interesting, because listening to you there, Keith, and reading the chapter 6, The Highly Effective Communicator, again, you're providing so many mini skills here. The use of your voice, volume, pace, pitch, breath, and pause, and listening to you there, embedded commands, embedded questions. I'm thinking of the coach who coaches for 10 years but does the same thing year on year. And so they don't really have 10 years of experience, they have just 10 times 1 year. And listening to you there and reading your book, I mean, I think this is why it's so great for coaches, is because actually monitoring the language that they use, coaching on purpose, coaching with intention, coaching with an awareness of how they're communicating, I just think is so important. I think this book is a great blueprint to help you monitor your own coaching and improve. And the other word I wanted to bring in there was influencer. Listening to you, I think of coach as influencer. Reading that chapter, coach as influencer, and talking about being an influencer, David, in chapter 8, you write about the silent whisperer. What on earth is the silent whisperer, David? That almost sounds like a movie that's quite chilling. But tell me how it relates to coaching.
Yeah. So the silent whisperer, I think, as coaches, we're able to pass messages on to our athletes, just directly to them. But at the same time, is there a third party that can do a better job?
Yep.
Or that can get a more effective message across? And understanding who that person is and understanding when and how to use that, the person is vitally important. And I think, there are obviously lots of examples within that chapter of, I think one of them was with Nick Marshall, when he was actually when he was back at Nottingham Forest, and I believe there was something that where they were in a pre-season camp, so to speak, and he used somebody outside of the club who influenced Michael Dawson.
Yep.
And Michael Dawson, obviously at the time, was just another player. He's gone on to play for England. He's had a very successful career. But Nick, and when we spoke to him about it, he said, at that point for me, it was probably me just continually banging on the same message, and is that message really going to get across, because it's just my voice? And he used somebody else from outside of the club that was a pro athlete at the time, just to get the message across to Michael Dawson. And it was a great example of using somebody else to really get the same message across and be more effective about it. And I think whether it could be someone from outside, it could be someone from within, it could be using another player. You could use another player, you could use a coach. And I've had experiences where I've worked with a player and they've been fantastic, and I've actually told another coach to tell this player what they were good at later on that session, where I heard you were I heard you were fantastic today. I've been told about it, and that message then carries much more weight than if it was just me saying, Johnny, great job today. Because it's now coming from more than just me. It's coming from somebody else. It's a reinforcement. And I know at Wickham with Richard Dobson, who's a very close friend of my dad's. He's a fantastic guy. They've actually done it at the club where they've created a group of players that have become silent whisperers. They are the generals within a group, but messages transmit through the coaches to the generals, through to the players, so that it's not always coming from the coach. And I think just being aware of that situation, understanding who can pass the message on, and I've touched on it, could be a coach, it could be another player, it could be a parent, it could be guardians, it could be someone from outside that can pass on a message to reinforce something to make it even more powerful for the person that's receiving it.
Danny, can I just add to that,
please,
if I may? The book's about connection, and at times it can be quite strange because we have, particularly at the highest, the real sharp end. I'm sure they're dealing with cultural differences, athletes coming from different countries, and when you're dealing with that, there are all sorts taking place. We're not always going to be able to connect. The book's not the cure-all. I think what we've got to do is provide, and as I think we've probably provided it, is there are strategies within to be able to alleviate and go through the mud at times. So, going through a third person, it might be you don't quite connect with an athlete. So therefore, it's finding and we can ask questions and elicit information from that one recipient, and the message doesn't get across. So, in addition to reinforcing something that's good, we've also got to see whether we can covertly get a message across to an athlete where we don't see eye to eye with them, but we can still get the leverage. We're still getting the outcome, and the outcome is, if it's favourable for the athlete, then it's a win-win-win. And it's important that we are receptive to that, because we can want to communicate. We don't get along with an athlete, so therefore we keep bashing the same message, and the doors start closing, and we're actually sending them further away from where we want them to be. So behaviour and actions then, we're not letting the player be free. So it's important as well that we're not always going to be able to get the message across. We'll be able to get it across, but it didn't come across in the way that is received, because we're passing these messages all the time. So, find out who, we'll have a peer group leader or a leader within that specific group that could very well be able to convey the message on us, which David's alluded to down at Wickham, where they have a wonderful culture down there, where the generals, they're passing those on. So equally, as well as we get along with them, we might not always get along with the athletes.
It's really interesting, because as you're both speaking there, David and Keith, I'm thinking of that tension between knowing yourself as a coach, knowing your characteristics, your personality characteristics, if you like, those all-important self-skills, being self-aware, which we can go back to your chapter 2. You talk about know yourself first as a platform for building a connection. But that tension between knowing yourself and developing yourself, and then accepting yourself. And I think what I'm thinking as I'm listening to you both is, sometimes as a coach, you've just got to accept that you can't always get on with players. You're not always going to build that amazing relationship with them, or have a co-orientation with them that I talked about with Professor Sophia Jarrett on her episode of the Sports Psych Show. You're not always going to have that rapport, and when you don't, that's okay. you don't give up there. That's what I'm hearing you both say. You don't give up. You find a way. You find another way. You find somebody else. So I think it was, David, you were talking about a cricketer who came in and worked with a player there instead of Nick Marshall, the football coach. It was a guy called Jamie Hart, who's Paul Hart's son, the manager. And I think that's great coaching, is understanding, yes, you want to develop yourself, but sometimes the reality is you're a human being. You're going to have some limits. That's okay. How can we overcome? You might have to look outside of yourself. That's kind of what I'm hearing from both of you.
Yeah. I think that's an incredible quality to have as well, to know your strengths, know what you're effective in and what you're exceptional at, but also understanding at the right time when is somebody else in a better place. When can I use something else to have a more profound impact? I think it's because it's not about me as the coach. It's about what I can do to help this athlete, and it might be something that somebody else is better at that I can utilize. I think it's such a great quality to be open and receptive and understand also what your weaknesses are too.
Yeah, there is sorry, Dan, there is I think there's Daring Greatly, Brené Brown, she's authored a book. It's a wonderful book. And it goes into particularly males prominently, because we're, all three of us are male. It applies to everyone. It's exposing openly what your weaknesses are, and I think for males it's quite challenging to be able to do that, because we go into this. It could be a toxic environment that's been created unknowingly at the time, because everybody, when we all set off, we set off with positive intention behind every meaning. That's what we do. It'll be a positive intention for him or for them, and ultimately it might finish off as it isn't that, then becomes toxic because of not self-regulating and understanding what our behaviours might be transmitting to the group or an individual. Because at any one time, our state of well-being could change. We might be driving to the gym or to the training ground, and there could be an incident. You might have a family issue. You could have had a little bump in the car, or it could be a little bit of road rage that's taking place. And I think as coaches, we've got to park that, and we've got to have this bell jar of understanding that as soon as you put this cloak on, or this badge on, or that kit on, it changes. But it's when we don't do that, as there tends to be this intransigent behaviour whereby we are not making change regardless of what happens in front of me. They will comply with this, and you alluded to, you mentioned it earlier, you might have coached for 10 years, but your behaviours have not changed in that period of time. I've been involved in the game 37 years, and I don't profess to be any better now, other than I've got more experiences under the belt. I feel there's more, the social aspect and the social element, and developing the behaviours are far greater than the technical skills. They are they not? The players are playing the game before they even sleep, or when they sleep. The game's played the event in the mind on a Friday, and they play on a Saturday or a Sunday. It's taken off in advance. So when we leave them with an experience, can we leave them with a positive feeling? If we're doing anything other than that, why are we coaching? I don't get it. I think we're pretty good at finding out what we're not good at. Surely, if we're going to reinforce that, it's going to draw out more negative feelings of that, what we don't want them to do, or what we don't want them to behave like. So if we acknowledge that, and what's been mentioned in the book, it's just a way. It's not the only way to go about doing X. But if we're not going to make a change because there's a behaviour that we've not come across, and it's a negative behaviour in front of players, and this being flexible, I think the flexibility is crucial. as a coach, rather than, look, I will tell you how this has been done, and if you don't listen, I'm going to tell you how it's going to be done. And we lose. I don't think, because it's not the right way. I think that's a solid belief from my perspective. And I'm not saying it's the right way. It's the way that I believe needs to be. We need to be tuned in to what's happening outside of ourselves. And having this chameleon skin where you might have had an issue, but then our behaviour, our state of mind can affect our performance. And that's where, do you care? Can I trust you? Can I learn from you? Where it reinforces, they'll pick it up, and they'll pick up more from your behaviour and your actions rather than words. They'll sense your attitude from what you say. They hear your words, but they definitely sense your attitude. And the Richard Dobson and many more. Their book, with Pete Sturgis and Nick Marshall, who's the head of football operations. They're very comfortable in who they are. They know who they are, and I think the art of coaching is the ability to use a variety of different techniques, not just one technique, or use someone else, rather than you. We are the cure-all, we are the fixer, we are the king of all information, and we've got all the font of knowledge of life. Sometimes we've got to be free and acknowledge that we haven't got that. We haven't got it all. When no man is his own island, we've got to allow other people to come into the party to allow us to get the best from our athletes. And surely that's who it's for. We've got to enhance and let players be free in what they do, and who knows what can happen.
Well said, Keith. Very well said. 37 years of experience speaking there over the last few minutes, so that was fantastic. And my only slight disappointment with the book is you didn't manage to get the phrase you mentioned there within what you were saying, a bell jar of understanding, which I really loved. A bell jar of understanding. I've never heard that before, so I might steal that one from you and put it in an article somewhere. Thank you to you both. What a brilliant hour that has been, and I just love that idea of a book around feeling, essentially, but packed with techniques and philosophies, ideas, and strategies, and some great stories from some great coaches within it as well. It's brilliant. David, where can people get hold of the book?
Yeah, so the book it was published on Amazon. So the book itself is available to purchase on Amazon. There are now there are other websites and stores that have actually bought in bulk and are now selling it too. But Amazon's probably your best bet to go and get it.
Brilliant. And how can people follow you both? What social media platforms is it easy for people to follow you on?
Yeah, I'm at Keith Mayer 5 on Twitter. David?
Yep, I am DJ Mayer 3 on Twitter as well.
Okay, and are there any other ways that people can get hold of you if you'd like to be gotten hold of, that is?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, there's obviously LinkedIn. LinkedIn's one. We just released our own website, which is golddustmentoring.com, but we will be over the coming weeks, we'll be releasing a podcast on the back of the book. So we're excited for that. So that'll be coming out. I think the Twitter, and I think it's Gold Dust Podcast. Twitter.
And just to I don't know, we're asking or telling. I think it might be an embedded command here, Dan. You will be cordially invited to don your words, if you like. So we'll certainly be sending the lure out for you. We'd love to have you on, and do the flip of this and host. If we can host equally as good as what you've done here, we'd be more than happy.
Well, I'll take that embedded command. I think it's more of a command, an overt command than an embedded command. I don't think there was much subtle about that, but we'll go with that, and I'd be certainly honoured to come on your show. Well, look, David and Keith, it's just been a pleasure to speak with you both. It's a great book. I thoroughly recommend that coaches go out and buy that. So thank you both for coming on the Sports Site Show.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you ever so much, Dan. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, sir. Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch via Twitter or through Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Site Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.